Welcome to Inside the Studio. I'm Evan Sanford. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm excited for the program we have for you today. My special guest is the Redlands Symphony Music Director and Conductor, Ransom Wilson. Ransom is a graduate of Juilliard and is an internationally recognized flutist. He is also here to make a very exciting announcement. It's a pleasure to welcome him to the program. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Let's get right to it. What was your introduction to music?
You know, I came from the Deep South, Alabama, and there's not much, at the time in Tuscaloosa, there wasn't much classical music. Music was always about the football games. And so I naturally, you know, when it came time for an instrument, it was a band instrument. It wasn't not going to be a string instrument, you know. Luckily, my parents took me to an orchestral performance, and I heard the flute, and it just did something to me. You know, I got so excited. It was visceral, and so, you know, we got a really cheap one, and I got lessons from someone really wonderful who happened to be working with my mom at the university, and she gave me some really important insights that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I was just, you know, with a band director, teacher, or something like that. I happened to find a real artist, you know. Unfortunately, she left 6 months later, but it, you know, that all-important beginning was there.
What were some of those insights that she gave you?
Well, you know, I was 12 years old. She would talk to me about tone color, which was a concept that for a 12-year-old was very hard to get, but she had a very, very good way of explaining it. So, you know, she'd say, for example, and she'd say, I want you to change the color of the sound here. I'm like, I don't know what that means, you know. She said, well, you know, if somebody was listening outside the door, on the other side of the door, they would think that at this point there was a second flute player in the room. That's how different it should sound. Like one sound and then another completely different sound. And that I can understand at 12 years old, you know. And she was just so kind and nurturing. She went on, finally, I lost track of her for years because she moved away, you know, at the end of that semester. And years later, I managed to find her in Indiana, where she was from, and contacted her. And I had become well known by that point, and she didn't know that that person that she had albums of was the person that she had taught at age 12. So it was a very tearful reunion, you know. And then we remained friends until she unfortunately passed away quite suddenly last year. You know, I did tributes to her and that kind of thing. But she was a very important influence in my life.
Let's move from your lessons with her to your time at Juilliard. How did that affect you as a musician?
Juilliard's a very competitive place. You know, it's where all the greatest musicians come out of, really, certainly in this country. And I had the good fortune of going to high school first. I left Alabama and went to North Carolina for the North Carolina School of the Arts, where I had a really good teacher and a really nice environment. And they were all the faculty were New Yorkers. It was a brand new school at that point. And so I got to interact with great artists from New York, as well as my fellow students from all over the country, who were doing great things in their own field. I got to meet more with dancers for the first time, actors. It was a very exciting place in those years. It was like 1966 to 69. So that by the time I got to New York, I was actually kind of really ready for it, because I'd been very well trained in North Carolina. And the minute I visited New York the first time, I realized I was home. And even though I'm now living in Connecticut, it's like an hour and a half drive, I'm still a New Yorker. I always have been. And my grandmother told me that when I was a little boy, she would say, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I want to move to New York and go to Juilliard. I don't have any memory of that at all, so obviously it was on my mind for a long time. So anyway, Juilliard is, you know, it's the best, which makes it extremely competitive and kind of cutthroat. So after my 4 years there, I was really ready to leave and kind of control my own destiny. and I got a Fulbright to France to study with Jean-Pierre Rampal, who was at that time the most famous flute player in the world. And I had met him, and he had said, I played for him, and he said, "Oh, well, you should get a scholarship and come to Paris and study with me," as if that's easy, you know. But I managed to, and ended up there. Rarely saw him because he was at the very height of his career. He was doing 250 concerts a year. Can you imagine what that means? I mean, not all in one place, mind you, in 250 different places. The travel alone would have killed me, but that was his thing. He was just on the go all the time. But yeah, I learned a great deal from him. I had the great good fortune of living in Paris for a year. I'm fluent in French now, and I got to meet other people from other cultures. And the thing is, when you learn a foreign language, and maybe you know this personally, you start to think like a different person. And you start to see the world from a different point of view. So I think it's essential. It's an essential part of an education to learn a foreign language. Just learning how the language is structured gives you a completely different worldview. And I think, particularly in the world that we live in at present, that would be great if everybody had more than one point of view,
Do you think music is its own language?
Yeah, because it's kind of amazing that a musician from New York can go to Dubai and meet another musician that's been trained in the Western music style, and we can sit down and play with no trouble. It's that universal a language. What's interesting is now all kinds of ethnic music is coming in from all cultures to classical music too. So, like my generation, we just studied classical. That was it. Then there was a generation right after me that started studying a little jazz as well as classical, like Wynton Marsalis, for example. Perfect example.
He studied with you?
No, he was the generation right after me, and he was both jazz and classical, which at the time was still unusual. Now it's completely common. I mean, people are beginning to realize they're all part of the same kind of universal language of music. Music is so powerful that it can either quiet a crowd completely, it can mesmerize you, or it can make you angry, it can make you feel passionate. They say that in the 19th century, opera was banned in many places because it made people so emotional. And I guess that was a bad thing.
Well, speaking of music making emotions, you're certainly doing that as the conductor of the Redlands Symphony. You're in the middle of your first season with the symphony. How do you think the season's going?
It's going great. It's our attendance is way up, and everybody just seems to be excited about it. I mean, Jan Robertson was, my predecessor, was obviously a wonderful man and wonderful musician, but he was here for 33 years in the same position. That's really a long time to keep things fresh, So I think eventually he realized it would really be best if I, went on to other things, and so a lot of things are changing quickly, and I'm trying to kind of I'm trying to bring more of what the real world is like into the symphony here in Redlands. I'm trying to represent different kinds of music and not just the big warhorse classics. And I like those. I love those. Of course, we're doing a Beethoven concert tonight. But also, what about things that are being written right now? What about things written at another time and not so famous, but still kind of relevant? I like to do programming that reflects a theme of some kind. I try not to make those themes really dumb, try to make them have some kind of intellectual relevance. But for example, next season, the beginning of next season, we're doing a jazz meets classical kind of concert. Have a French pianist coming. He's the prize winner, incredible musician, and a friend of mine. And we're going to do Ravel's Piano Concerto, which was heavily influenced by Gershwin and American jazz. We're also going to do Rhapsody in Blue, obviously Gershwin, heavily influenced by jazz. And I found another piece by an African-American composer that actually predates Rhapsody in Blue by a couple of years. And to my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't know of another piece that infuses jazz elements in classical music before this piece. His composer's name is William Grant Still, and the piece is called Darker America. It's about a 10-minute piece, absolutely gorgeous. Not well known at all, but really deserves to be. So that's the kind of what I'm trying to do with the programming, is kind of shake it up a little bit, you know, because America is a very different place than it was 33 years ago. Some good, some not so good, you know. But it's certainly a different kind of population mix. Lots more cultures are represented in the mainstream. And I think, you know, if we want to be in the mainstream, we have to reflect what society really is.
Well, before we go to break, why Redlands? Of all places, why choose Redlands?
You know, I used to work up at the Idlewild Arts Academy in the mountains here, and I would commute 6-7 times a year from the east. And we would, you know, I would fly into Ontario and pass Redlands, and I thought, well, this looks like a nice place, you know. Then eventually I brought my orchestra down of high school kids and played in the chapel on the campus here, and we loved it. And then I went downtown and saw how beautiful it is, and thought this is kind of the perfect town, you know. And you know, there's nothing better than being bi-coastal, I tell you right now, because people are so different out here in terms of just personality. And it's kind of a nice combination. I always say, you know, just about the time I can't stand how rude people are on the East Coast, I get to come here, and then about the time when I start to think, I got to get back to reality, then I get to go back, you know. So it's a nice combination.
I'll bet. Well, just stay right there. We'll be right back with more Inside the Studio right after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm here with Redlands Symphony Music Director and Conductor Ransom Wilson. I heard you have an announcement for us for a new project you're a part of.
Yes, this is really very exciting. The Redlands Symphony is joining forces with Lincoln Center, Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and 3 other organizations to commission a work by Pulitzer Prize-winning composer John Luther Adams. It's a big deal. John Luther Adams got his Pulitzer for this piece called Become Ocean. That's an hour-long orchestral work that moves at an incredibly slow pace, but it's all about the ocean. And people come away from it realizing that we have a crisis with our oceans without anybody saying a word. It's really extraordinary, and it's extraordinary music. And his music has always been about nature. He spent, I think, 30 years or more living in Alaska, and became an environmental activist up there. And seriously, I mean, he actually ran an organization for a while, but the whole time he was writing music about what was around him, and people began to notice that there was this different kind of music coming out. This is not like most Western music. It moves at the pace that nature moves, and you know, it's cliche to say, you know, like watching grass grow, but it's at that kind of pace, and it tends to just bring people down to a very amazing place. And so I'm thrilled that I happen to know him, and so I could call him up and say, can we put together a consortium, you know? And luckily, Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center said they thought it was a great idea, so we're doing this. He's written a piece. I got a quote from him this week about it. He now lives in Baja California, and because he likes the solitude and the stillness, and probably likes the weather a little better than Alaska. But so the piece is about the Sonoran Desert, and it's called "There Is No One, Not Even the Wind." And he's, you know, it's about time and space, basically. I don't know any more about it because I haven't heard a note of it. You know?
Well, what are you trying to accomplish with embarking on such a project?
A lot of audience members have this idea that new music is some terrible thing that they need to stay away from at all costs. And there certainly was a period in new music when the music was invariably harsh and kind of off-putting, and it kind of pushed the audience away. And now with the influence of all of these, you know, the ethnic influences and environmental influences and even political influences, music has changed to the point that a lot of new music is actually very listenable on first hearing. But I try not to find pieces that are just easy to listen to, but that don't have some important component, either emotional or intellectual. And with John Luther Adams, you have everything, because he has an environmental message, but it doesn't have to hit you over the head with it. He just makes you aware of. He makes you stop and think, wow, we are really connected to the place around us, without saying a word. It's pretty extraordinary. There's no speech. There's nothing. It's just this incredible, slow-moving nature. So I can't wait for the audiences here to experience it.
What is your role in the collaboration?
Well, I actually am the person who thought it up, and I had to find, you know, I had to find 5 partners, because composers get paid by how famous they are, basically, and he's very famous right now. But since he wrote that Ocean piece, everybody wants to get a piece from him. So the fact that he's writing a piece for Redlands is really extraordinary, because he's writing for the Chicago Symphony and Philadelphia Orchestra and stuff. It's he wouldn't bother with Redlands unless he had a connection. So it's a big deal.
And who else is involved in making this happen?
I'm afraid you were going to ask me that. There's one in Santa Barbara, there's one in Seattle, and there's one in Portland. And don't ask me to tell you the names.
I won't, I promise. And when will it be performed?
It's next season.
Next season.
And so it's supposed to be delivered, the score is supposed to be delivered to us this June, so that we can start preparing for it. The world premiere will happen in New York in November, and then ours will be a little while after that.
So November 2017, it will be performed in New York.
Exactly.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being here. This was such a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Really great to meet you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for the show today. Until next time, I'm Evan Sanford, and this is Inside the Studio. See you soon.